"We're looking for someone more stable," Jason said, sliding the resume back across the glass table without meeting her eyes, as if the paper itself carried something inconvenient, something he didn't want to touch for too long. And Emily Carter stood there with both hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, fingers still, posture straight, her voice never leaving her throat, while the room behind him hummed with low conversations and the soft clink of coffee mugs, a polished office. 12 floors above the street where everything smelled faintly of leather and ambition, and for a second, just a second, his eyes flicked up, recognition sparking, and then immediately dimming into something colder, something practiced. Because of course he knew who she was, of course he remembered the woman who used to wait up past midnight with a lamp on and dinner gone cold, the woman who once believed in every word he said about building a future, and now here she was, standing in front of him in a navy blazer that fit just a little too carefully, as if she had chosen it for armor rather than style, her hair pulled back, her expression unreadable, while two junior managers exchanged a quick glance behind him. The kind that carries a quiet judgment, the kind that says they've already decided who belongs and who doesn't, and Jason cleared his throat, tapping the edge of the resume into alignment like he was fixing a minor inconvenience instead of dismissing a person. "We move fast. Here. It's demanding. I don't think it's the right environment for your situation," he added, vague but deliberate, his gaze drifting for half a second toward the faint crease on her sleeve where a child's small hand might have held on earlier that morning, and Emily followed that glance. Just barely, then lifted her eyes back to him, calm, almost detached, like she was watching a scene she had already lived through once before, and she nodded, slow, controlled, no tremor in her breath, no plea, no explanation. Just acceptance wrapped in something quieter, something harder to name, as she reached forward and took the resume back, smoothing it once with her palm, as if resetting it, as if resetting herself, while the city stretched wide beyond the windows, traffic inching below like time that never waited for anyone, and without another word, she turned, heels clicking softly against the marble floor, each step measured, unhurried. As the door opened and closed behind her with a muted finality, leaving Jason already looking down at the next file, already moving on, unaware that the version of Emily Carter who had once stood still for him had just walked out, and the one who would walk back and would not be asking for anything at all. The elevator door slid open with a soft chime, and Emily stepped inside, the quiet hum of the building fading into a distant blur as the mirrored walls reflected a version of her she barely recognized, composed, steady, untouched by what had just happened upstairs. But the moment the doors closed, the reflection shifted into something more familiar, a memory layered over glass, a kitchen lit by a single overhead bulb, a plate left untouched on the table, and Jason's voice cutting through the silence, telling her he needed more, that ambition required sacrifice, that she would not understand, and she had stood there then too, hands still, listening instead of arguing, because love had once sounded like patience and patience had felt like strength. And later that night she had folded a small stack of clothes into a suitcase while her son slept in the next room, the soft rise and fall of his breathing the only rhythm she trusted, and she remembered how heavy the door felt when she closed it behind her, not because of what she was leaving, but because of what she had to carry forward alone. And now, years later, the elevator descended floor by floor, each number lighting up and disappearing as if time itself were quietly counting her steps, and she adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, the same bag she had carried through early mornings at a coffee shop that smelled like burnt espresso and long hours, where she learned to move quickly, to listen carefully, to save every dollar. And later at night, when the city outside her window slowed down, she would sit at a small table with her laptop open, screen glowing against the dark, teaching herself things no one had offered to teach her before: finance, markets, strategy, words that once belonged to rooms like the one she had just walked out of, and slowly, almost invisibly, those words began to fit in her hands. And the woman in the mirror no longer looked like someone waiting to be chosen, but someone quietly choosing her own direction. And when the elevator reached the ground floor and the doors opened again, the noise of the street rushed in, taxis passing, people moving, the ordinary rhythm of a city that never paused for anyone's disappointment, and Emily stepped forward into it without hesitation, her expression unchanged, her pace even, as if nothing significant had happened at all. But somewhere beneath that calm, something had already shifted, something that did not need to be seen yet to be real, something that would not announce itself when it arrived again, because the next time she walked through those doors, it would not be to ask for a place, it would be to take one that had already become hers. She did not cry that night, not when she pushed open the door to her small apartment, not when her son ran toward her with quiet excitement and wrapped his arms around her waist, and not even when she stood by the kitchen sink rinsing a single cup under warm water that fogged the window just enough to blur the city lights outside, because she had learned that tears did not change outcomes, and silence, when held long enough, became something stronger than emotion. And later, when the apartment settled into its usual stillness, she sat at the small table near the window with her laptop open, the glow reflecting faintly in her eyes as numbers and charts filled the screen. Unfamiliar once, but now arranged with a kind of quiet logic she had trained herself to understand, each late night adding another layer, another inch of ground reclaimed, and the clock on the wall ticked past 10, then 11, then midnight. While her son slept in the next room, a soft night light casting a gentle circle on the floor, and Emily remained there, posture straight, shoulders relaxed, as if time no longer pressed against her but moved alongside her. Instead, and in the days that followed, her routine did not change. Mornings began before sunrise with the smell of coffee and the sound of traffic building outside, afternoons filled with steady work, evenings reserved for study and small, deliberate decisions that no one else could see, small investments, careful risks, choices made without hesitation, because she was no longer asking if she belonged in rooms like the one she had been turned away from. She was preparing for the moment she would no longer need permission to enter them, and one afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the cafe windows in soft golden lines across the counter, a man stepped inside, dressed simply but with a presence that did not need to announce itself. His movements unhurried, his gaze observant, as if he noticed more than he said, and when Emily handed him his coffee, their eyes met briefly, just long enough for something unspoken to pass between them, not recognition, not yet, but a quiet acknowledgement, and he nodded once, a small, respectful gesture, before stepping aside, and Emily returned to her work without pause, unaware that this brief moment, as ordinary as it seemed, had just shifted something invisible in the direction of her path, something that would not reveal itself immediately, but would wait, patiently, until the exact moment it mattered most. The man returned the next day at exactly the same time, and then again the day after that, always ordering the same black coffee, always standing in the same place near the end of the counter where the sunlight reached just far enough to catch the edge of his sleeve. And Emily noticed the pattern without trying to, the way she noticed everything now, small consistencies that others overlooked, and on the fourth day, when the afternoon slowed and the line thinned, he placed a folded receipt on the counter instead of walking away immediately, his voice calm, measured. "You read financial reports after your shift," he said, not as a question, but as a fact, and Emily paused for half a second, her hand still resting on the register. Before she met his gaze, steady and unguarded, "I study," she replied, simple, without explanation, and he nodded once, as if that was the only answer he needed, then slid the receipt closer to her, revealing a handwritten note, just a time and an address in clean, precise lettering, nothing more, no title, no company name, no promise attached, and for a brief moment, the noise of the cafe seemed to fade again, replaced by that quiet space where decisions are made without anyone else noticing, and Emily looked down at the note, then back at him, searching for something that might Define the offer, but his expression did not shift. There was no persuasion, no urgency, only the calm presence of someone who was used to doors opening without explanation, and when she did not respond immediately, he did not push. He simply stepped back, gave a slight nod, and left, the bell above the door ringing softly as it closed behind him, and Emily stood there for a moment longer than usual, the paper still between her fingers, before she folded it once and slipped it into her pocket, returning to the rhythm of her work as if nothing had changed. But later that night, when the apartment was quiet and the city lights flickered beyond her window, she placed the note on the table beside her laptop, the numbers on the screen reflecting faintly across its surface, and she studied it the same way she studied everything now, not with doubt, but with calculation, because she understood something she had not understood before. That opportunities rarely arrive with explanations, and the ones that matter most do not ask for belief. They wait for readiness, and as the clock moved steadily forward, Emily closed her laptop, reached for her phone, and without hesitation, entered the address into her calendar, her expression unchanged. Her decision already made, because she was no longer the woman who waited to be invited. She was becoming the one who chose which doors were worth walking through. The address led her to a building she had passed before without ever really seeing, a quiet structure set back from the main street with dark glass windows that reflected the city without revealing anything inside. And when Emily arrived the next afternoon, 10 minutes early, she paused. Only briefly at the entrance, her reflection faint against the polished surface, before stepping inside with the same steady pace she carried everywhere now, her heels soft against the floor, her posture unchanged, and the lobby greeted her with a calm kind of silence. The kind that did not need to impress because it already belonged to a different level of certainty, and a receptionist looked up, offering a small, professional smile as if expecting her name. "Please," she asked, and Emily answered without hesitation, her voice even, "Emily Carter," and there was no flicker of surprise, no questioning glance, only a quick nod as the receptionist pressed a button and gestured toward a private elevator, and as the doors opened, Emily stepped inside, alone again with her reflection, but this time it did not feel like a memory following her. It felt like something aligning, something catching up to where she had been quietly moving all along, and when the elevator reached the top floor, the doors opened into a wide, sunlit space where the city stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, and he was already there, standing near the window with the same calm presence, turning slightly as she approached. "You came," he said, not surprised, just acknowledging what he had expected, and Emily stopped a few steps away, her expression composed. "You gave me a time," she replied, and something almost like approval crossed his face, subtle, controlled, before he motioned toward a table where a single folder rested, unopened, and she moved toward it, her hand brushing lightly over the surface before she opened it, pages filled with numbers, projections, structures that were familiar now, not intimidating, not distant. And she scanned them with quiet focus, her mind already moving ahead of what was written, calculating, connecting, understanding without needing explanation. And when she looked up again, he was watching her, not evaluating, not testing, but observing in a way that suggested he had already made a decision long before this moment, and the room remained still for a breath longer than necessary, until he finally spoke, his tone even. "I do not offer chances. I offer positions," and Emily closed the folder gently, her fingers resting on its edge, her gaze steady as she met his, not asking what came next, not wondering if she was ready, because somewhere between the long nights, the quiet mornings, and the moment she walked out of that office, she had already crossed the line where doubt used to live, and now, standing here, she did not feel like someone being invited in. She felt like someone arriving exactly where she was supposed to be. He did not explain the numbers in the folder, and she did not ask, because the silence between them had already established something more precise than instruction, and as the late afternoon light stretched across the floor in long, quiet lines, He moved to the other side of the table and placed a single document beside the folder, thinner, cleaner, the kind of paper that did not need to impress because it carried weight on its own, and Emily glanced down, her eyes scanning the first page with the same calm focus she had trained into herself over countless nights, and this time there was no hesitation in her expression, no flicker of surprise, only a subtle shift in her breathing as the structure revealed itself, ownership percentages, decision rights, a position that did not sit below anyone but alongside the highest level of control, and she lifted her gaze slowly, meeting his eyes again, steady, composed, as if confirming something she had already understood before she ever walked into the room, and he gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible. "You see it," he said, not asking, and Emily closed the document with deliberate care, her fingers resting on the edge for a moment before she spoke, her voice even. "It is not a job." And for the first time, there was the faintest hint of approval in his expression, something that did not need to be stated out loud, because she had recognized the difference without guidance, and outside the glass walls, the city continued its constant motion, cars moving in steady lines, people crossing streets without knowing that decisions were being made above them that would ripple far beyond a single moment, and inside that quiet room, Emily reached for the pen placed beside the document, not rushing, not pausing, simply moving with the certainty of someone who no longer measured her steps against fear, and as the pen touched the paper, the motion was smooth, controlled, final. A signature that did not just accept an offer but redefined her place entirely, and when she set the pen down, the sound was soft, almost unnoticeable, but it carried a kind of weight that could not be reversed. And he watched her for a brief second longer before speaking. Again, his tone unchanged. "There will be a board review next week," he said. "You will attend," and Emily nodded once, no questions, no reaction beyond acknowledgement, because she understood what that meant without needing explanation. Understood that the next time she entered a room like the one she had been turned away from, it would not be as someone asking to be seen, but as someone who would be impossible to ignore, and as she turned toward the window for just a moment, the reflection that looked back at her was no longer layered with the past, no longer divided between who she had been and who she was becoming. It was singular, aligned, and when she walked out of that building, her steps remained the same, measured, quiet. But the direction had changed completely, and somewhere, without anyone announcing it, the balance had already begun to shift. The boardroom carried a different kind of silence than the cafe or the apartment, one that settled over polished wood and floor-to-ceiling windows, a silence shaped by authority and expectation, and as the long table filled one seat at a time, low voices exchanged updates and quiet confidence. Jason Miller stood near the screen at the front, adjusting his cufflinks with a practiced ease, his reflection faint against the glass behind him, unaware of the shift already set in motion, and when the door opened again, it was subtle, almost easy to miss, but the timing was exact, and Emily Carter stepped inside without hesitation, her presence neither announced nor explained, yet immediately altering the rhythm of the room. Her heels soft against the floor, her posture steady, her expression composed in a way that did not seek attention but commanded it quietly, and for a brief second, Jason's voice faltered, just enough to break the flow of his sentence as recognition flickered across his face, sharper this time, harder to dismiss. Because she did not look like someone who had come back to ask for anything, she looked like someone who had arrived with purpose already defined, and a few heads turned. Subtle glances exchanged between members of the board who had not yet connected the name to the person, but felt the shift nonetheless, and Emily did not rush, did not scan the room for approval. She simply walked to the seat placed along the side of the table, the one that had been left empty with quiet intention, and as she took it, setting her folder down with controlled precision, the sound was soft but final, and Jason straightened, recovering quickly, forcing a small, polite smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "You are here for the review?" he asked, the question thin, unnecessary. And Emily met his gaze without hesitation, her voice calm, level, "I am exactly where I need to be," she replied, and there was no emphasis, no challenge, just a statement that settled into the room with a weight that did not need to be explained. And across the table, a few members exchanged brief looks, sensing something unfolding beneath the surface, something not yet revealed, but already undeniable. And as the meeting resumed, Jason turned back to the screen, continuing his presentation with measured confidence, unaware that the center of gravity had already shifted away from him, unaware that every number he spoke, every projection he defended, now existed within a structure he no longer fully controlled. And Emily sat in silence, hands resting lightly on the table, her gaze steady, observing without interruption, because this moment was not about speaking, it was about presence, and she had already mastered the one thing that room respected most. The kind of quiet authority that does not introduce itself, it simply waits until everyone else realizes it is already there. Jason's voice carried across the room with practiced confidence, each number delivered with precision, each projection framed as certainty, and for a moment it almost worked, the rhythm of authority settling back into place as a few heads nodded along, pens moving lightly across paper. But then a single pause broke the pattern, subtle, almost invisible. When one of the senior board members leaned back slightly and glanced down at a document that had just been placed in front of him, and the shift began there, quiet, controlled, like a current changing direction beneath still water, and one by one, others followed. Pages turning, eyes scanning lines that had not been part of Jason's presentation, and he noticed it too late, his words slowing, his confidence catching on something he could not yet see. "Is there a question?" he asked, trying to recover the room. But the question did not land the way it used to, because the attention was no longer centered on him, and at the far end of the table, a voice spoke, calm, measured. "We would like clarification on ownership structure," and the air shifted. Completely. The kind of shift that does not raise its volume but changes everything, and Jason's expression tightened for a fraction of a second before smoothing out again, his eyes moving across the room until they stopped on Emily, because somewhere beneath the surface, he already knew, even if he did not understand how, and the folder in front of her remained closed, her hands resting lightly on top of it, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, and when the document in front of the board member was turned slightly, just enough for the name at the top to be visible, the silence that followed was no longer subtle, it was complete, deliberate, undeniable, and the name sat there without decoration, without explanation, carrying its own weight. Emily Carter, listed not as a candidate, not as an employee, but as a primary stakeholder, and no one needed to announce it, no one needed to interpret it out loud, because the meaning was immediate. And Jason's breath paused for just a second too long, his gaze fixed on her now, searching for something familiar, something he could still control, but finding nothing that belonged to the past he remembered, and Emily met his gaze without urgency, without emotion, simply present, simply certain, and when she finally moved, it was minimal, her hand opening the folder in front of her with quiet precision. The soft sound of paper against wood echoing more than it should have in the stillness of the room, and she did not raise her voice when she spoke, did not shift her tone, because she did not need to. "Please continue," she said, and it was not a request. Not an interruption, but a direction, one that settled into the room with a clarity no one questioned, and in that moment, the structure he had once stood at the center of no longer belonged to him, not in the way he believed it did, and the realization did not arrive with noise or confrontation, it arrived in silence, carried by a name he had once dismissed and a presence he could no longer ignore. No one spoke for a moment after her voice settled into the room, not because they were waiting for permission, but because something had already been decided without a vote, without a formal shift. The kind of decision that happens when reality becomes undeniable, and Jason stood there at the front, the screen still glowing behind him with projections that now felt distant, almost irrelevant, his hand resting lightly against the edge of the table as if grounding himself in something familiar. But the room no longer responded to him the same way. The attention had moved, quietly but completely, and Emily did not look at him again, not because she was avoiding him, but because there was nothing left to resolve, nothing left to revisit. The past had already lost its place in the present, and instead she turned her focus to the documents in front of her, her pen moving once, a small note added in the margin, precise, deliberate, the kind of action that did not need to be announced to carry weight. And across the table, one of the board members leaned forward slightly, nodding almost imperceptibly as if recognizing something that had always belonged there, something that had simply taken time to arrive, and the meeting continued. But the rhythm had changed, questions now directed toward her, pauses waiting for her acknowledgement, the structure reshaping itself around a presence that did not demand control yet naturally held it. And when the final page was turned and the discussion reached its quiet conclusion, chairs shifted back, papers gathered, the low hum of conversation returning in a different tone, one marked by awareness rather than assumption, and Emily closed her folder slowly, her movements unhurried, her expression unchanged, as if this outcome had never been uncertain, and as she stood, the city beyond the glass reflected in the room. Once more, vast, moving, indifferent to individual moments yet shaped by them all the same, and Jason stepped forward, just slightly, as if to speak, as if there were something left that needed to be said, but the words did not come. Not because he could not find them, but because they no longer held meaning in this space, and Emily paused only briefly, acknowledging his presence with a single glance that carried no resentment, no triumph, only clarity, and then she walked past him. Her steps, the same as they had always been, measured, quiet, certain, but now each one carried a different weight, not of burden, but of ownership, and as the door closed behind her, the sound was soft, almost unnoticed, yet final in a way that did not require emphasis, because she had not returned to reclaim anything from him. She had returned as someone who no longer needed what he once withheld, and somewhere between the silence and the shift, the truth had settled completely. She did not win him back. She won herself.